Acknowledge that videos appearing to show UFOs flying through the air are real. They don't call them UFOs, they call them unidentified aerial phenomena.
The U.S. Navy just made a stunning admission. Naval officials yesterday confirmed that 3 separate UFO videos released by the New York Times in 2017 and previewed on the show are actually genuine.
Well, guys, the cat's out of the bag. UFOs are real. Good old Ronnie Reagan hypothesized that UFO disclosure could potentially unite all of humanity.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
While others maintained that doing so would lead to a total collapse of society. But when the disclosure finally happened back in 2017, neither of those scenarios came to pass. In fact, it was barely a blip on our radar. To be fair, we Americans have been pretty preoccupied with other things since then. And to be honest, those grainy black and white videos that the Pentagon released don't appear to show much of anything. Couple that with the extremely whitewashed congressional hearings and the rebranding of UFOs to UAPs, and the whole thing just felt rather underwhelming and inconclusive. So how then did these 3 seemingly unimpressive videos result in the Navy officially adopting ways to report UFOs, the Department of Defense creating task forces to investigate those reports, and Congress passing legislation that protects whistleblowers from secret UFO programs?
Bombshell claims from a military whistleblower. UFO wreckage recovered by the U.S. kept classified by a secret government program for decades.
Well, once you understand what you're seeing, or perhaps more importantly, not seeing, in the videos, and hear the first-hand accounts from the service members who were there, that'll all become a lot clearer. We're also going to go over those 3 blurry pictures, because trust me, those aren't nothing. And an incident from 2019 in which 10 naval warships were swarmed by UFOs over the course of 3 consecutive nights. Yeah. So buckle up and toss out those tinfoil hats, baby. We're doing a deep dive into some of the very real UFO cases confirmed by the Pentagon. You guys are probably hearing my partner roaming around the office. This is Oliver. Say hi, Oliver. To catch you up to speed, we've got to talk real quick about why UFOs are now called UAPs and how we even got here to begin with. First of all, there's a lot of preconceived notions and stigma associated with the term UFO. But beyond that, it's become abundantly clear in more recent years that flying may not be an accurate way to describe what it is they're doing. Unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, is what UFOs are officially called now. The 5 observable characteristics of UAPs are instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, transmedium travel ability, meaning they're able to go from space to air to water with no inertial effect, and anti-gravity, meaning they fly with no wings, no rotors, no control surfaces, or discernible means of propulsion. While the term UAP is new, UFOs, or UAPs, are not. Since at least World War II, members of our armed forces have reported seeing UAPs. But even in the rare instances where it was reported, nothing was ever really done about it. This do-nothing response persisted well into the 2000s. Even after military pilots were regularly reporting seeing, and at times narrowly missing, UAPs in our airspace on a daily basis. Frustrated over the lack of response to the egregious safety hazard and potential national security threat these UAPs posed, Christopher Mellon, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, leaked 3 declassified UAP videos to the New York Times in the hopes that renewed public interest would lead to the DoD finally taking UAPs seriously.
We knew and understood that you had to go to the public, get the public interested, to get Congress interested, to then circle back to the Defense Department and get them to start taking a look at it. It's bizarre and unfortunate that someone like myself has to do something like that to get a national security issue like this on the agenda.
In November 2004, the USS Nimitz, along with its cruiser ship, the USS Princeton, were somewhere off the West Coast conducting training exercises. The Princeton was testing out their new, highly advanced radar system, and for about a week, they'd been picking up a bunch of unknown objects on it. And they didn't go away after restarting and calibrating the system. In fact, they only became clearer. The radar operators had no clue what to make of these things. They would come in from above 80,000 feet, which is way higher than commercial or military aircraft operate, and shoot straight down to 20,000 feet in less than a second, where they'd sit for hours, not moving an inch, and then suddenly shoot back up above 80,000 feet and disappear. They couldn't get visual confirmation of what these objects were because they never had planes in the air when they appeared. However, that all changed on the morning of November 14th. That day, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Alex Dietrich were flying to their cap point for a training exercise. Cap points are the area where the training exercise is going to occur, and it's only known to the pilots. Keep that in mind. Now, Commander David Fravor is no ordinary pilot. He's the CO of his own squadron, which is as high up as it gets. He's also a Naval Academy grad and a Top Gun grad. And in an interview, Navy Commander John Gutierrez described Commander Fravor as the perfect witness and as close to the real-life Top Gun Maverick as you're gonna get.
I wish the general public more inherently understood the quality of the caliber of witness, the quality of witness that a guy like Commander Fravor is. This is somebody that when they speak, people should listen, and take what they're saying seriously.
Basically, Commander Fravor's the shit. And very entertaining, I might add. I watched several interviews with him in preparation for this video, and I highly recommend checking them out for yourself. I'll have all the links in the description. Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Dietrich were heading to their cap point, when suddenly the Princeton canceled the exercise and told them they had a real-world vector they needed to check out instead. AKA, one of these weird things they'd been picking up on radar for a week. So they fly to where the Princeton says this thing is and start looking around. It was one of those clear, sunny days where the water is calm and smooth with no whitecaps. So they very quickly noticed a little patch of white water down below that was sort of cross-shaped and about the size of a 737. Now, they didn't see a cross-shaped craft, just white water breaking as though a 737 was just under the surface. And floating just above the white water was what appeared to be a roughly 40-foot-long, white, Tic Tac shaped object, making these little abrupt movements in all directions.
As we're looking at this, her backseater says, "Hey, Skipper, do you?" And about that got out, I said, "Dude, do you see that thing down there?" And we saw this little white Tic Tac looking object, and it's just kind of moving above the whitewater area.
Their first thought was that it must be a helicopter, but then they quickly realized there was no rotor wash, or rotors of any kind. So they spent a few minutes just kind of circling and watching this thing, trying to figure out what it was. Until finally, Commander Fravor decided to head down and get a closer look at this thing, while Lieutenant Dietrich stayed high to give them two perspectives on it. As Commander Fravor descended, the Tic Tac suddenly pointed west and started heading up toward him.
The Tic Tac still pointing north-south, it goes and just turns abruptly and starts mirroring me. So as I'm coming down, it starts coming up.
But he keeps closing the distance, and right as this thing is about to cross in front of him, it suddenly accelerated and vanished in half a second. So he radioed up to Lieutenant Dietrich and her backseater, asking if they still had eyes on it, and they didn't. They both said it just vanished.
When it flew in front of my nose, and I'm talking something, I'm within a half mile of it, looking at it, and it gets in front of me and just disappears. So we'll just go to something that everyone knows is fast. Let's just say SR-71 that's doing Mach 3. The visibility is 50 miles. So even at 35 miles a minute, I'm going to be able to see this thing turn into a little dot as it goes off into the horizon for probably a minute. The thing that we saw disappeared in a second. Just gone.
Not only that, but the whitewater was gone too. In case that wasn't strange enough, the Princeton radioed them a few seconds later and said, "You're not going to believe this, but that thing is at your cap point." That's right. That point they were flying to, that's only known to the pilots, and about 60 miles away from where it just was. Now, they did go to the cap point in search of it, but they never saw it again. However, that is not where this story ends. Commander Fravor's story is the one that you'll hear in relation to the Tic Tac footage, but it's not from Commander Fravor's encounter. When they got back to the ship, Commander Fravor told Commander Chad Underwood, who was next in line to go out, about what had just happened, and to be on the lookout for something weird. Upon hearing that, Commander Underwood was all, "Oh, I'm gonna go get this thing." From what I gather, Commander Underwood had a bit of a different setup on his aircraft.
They had a targeting pod on board.
So about an hour later, Commander Underwood goes out, and sure enough, he finds the Tic Tac and tries to lock it in on his radar, which tells the radar to grab it and build a track file of all of the info it can get on it, and point all of the cameras to it. But the radar came back indicating that it was being actively jammed, which, fun fact, is an act of war. The Tic Tac footage is what Commander Underwood picked up on their weapons systems. It's in black and white because it's in infrared mode, which has a wide, medium, and narrow zoom. But narrow in IR is only about medium in TV mode. So we see him then switch to TV mode, which is why it's now even more zoomed in and the black and white is reversed. Like now the sky is white and the object is black. Now, pause real quick. See where it says range 99.9? That's the indicator that this object is actively jamming their systems and the radar can't get a read on it. He keeps cycling between IR and TV, trying to get a good look at it, and then it just suddenly, instantaneously, zooms off. In IR mode, we can see, or more like don't see, any plume, flames, exhaust, or outgassing propellant of any kind. For comparison, here's what a 737 looks like in IR. The flames and exhaust are clearly visible. We also don't see any rotors, wings, or control surfaces of any kind. All things we could clearly see if this was something flying with traditional or known means of propulsion, including a drone.
Even if it is a
You can
military-grade drone, you see the machine.
Yes, absolutely. You can see if it's a quadcopter, let's say, you can see the individual, copters on the four sides of the thing. You can make all that stuff out.
Now, if you think that the Tic Tac and perhaps all of these UAP videos are just some secret black project tech that we don't know about, I get it. We have a long history of doing that. But here are 5 of the main reasons why we know that isn't the case with these things. Number 1, the Pentagon classified these as UAPs after exhausting all other possibilities, including secret or highly advanced tech of ours or anyone else's. Sorry guys, it's not China or Russia. Number 2, this footage is from 20 years ago. If this were some kind of tech that we or anyone else possessed, there would be some evidence of it by now.
Maybe, let's just say in 2004 it was something, somebody had this, some government had this, ours, whatever. If you come to now, you go 15 years later, you don't think that technology would have emerged because it literally would change everything we do. If you've got something that works like that, it would change air travel forever.
But these things are still light years away from anything that we see today. Number 3, everyone who tests Black Project technology isn't going to do it in an active military training zone, primarily because it's a safety issue. However, this brings us to reason number 4. Occasionally, aviators do accidentally witness or encounter Black Project technology. And when that happens, it is very obvious.
If there is something out there that you have seen as a pilot or aviator that you weren't supposed to see, you get vectored home, airborne in real time, say, hey, head home. And then you have to debrief with someone who's briefed on that particular project.
Which has happened to you. You have encountered something that is a black project and you had to debrief and there's a protocol for that.
Exactly.
Which then brings us to reason number 5, and what's perhaps the most compelling reason, in my opinion, is that in every single one of these UAP cases, that pain in the ass process never happened.
So nobody said to you, you saw something you shouldn't, this is a black project, sign this NDA. That is the protocol. That's what would have happened if it was US technology,
right?
US black technology, but that didn't happen.
No, and it didn't happen with Commander Fravor either.
And it's my understanding that the footage was only classified because it's from our military aircraft's weapon systems.
Yeah. And the tapes are actually classified secret because of the data that's on them. Okay.
Not because it's showing some secret black project technology. Now, there is a story floating around out there saying that a helicopter landed on the Nimitz and confiscated all of the footage, but it isn't true. In fact, this video was online years before the Pentagon released it.
The stuff that the government released, I don't know where they got it. Okay, so the stuff that was on Strangeland and YouTube, someone pulled off of a secret, it looks like a rack. There's tape machines in there and it gets converted to digital and stored on a hard drive, and they pulled it off that hard drive and they put it on YouTube. So there's a rumor too that, the original FLIR video is 10 minutes long and there's one of these petty officers is saying, I saw it. That's total crap. The original video is about 1 minute, 30 seconds long. What you see on the release video is the entire video.
As far as I know, we don't have firsthand accounts from this specific encounter yet. However, we do have a firsthand account from former Navy fighter pilot and instructor, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who was part of the Red Ripper strike group aboard the USS Roosevelt when this happened. Lieutenant Graves also spoke with the pilot involved as soon as he landed and routinely saw and encountered these UAPs himself. We've also got some additional info and analysis of the footage by Commander Fravor. In late 2013, early 2014, our military aircraft got a massive upgrade to their radar from the APG-73 to the APG-79, which Lieutenant Graves said was basically like going from analog radar to digital. But immediately following this upgrade, they started getting a bunch of radar hits in areas that should have been empty airspace. And they appeared to be doing some weird things. Sound familiar? At first, they thought it was just some kind of issue with the new radar system, and that these radar hits probably weren't real objects. Makes sense, right? But one day, someone managed to lock in one of these radar hits, which pointed their IR camera at it, and sure enough, there was some source of infrared energy coming from it.
That radar really doesn't give false targets. And then someone did exactly what Chad did, is they threw their targeting flare out there, and all of a sudden when you see a heat signature, there's a return, there's obviously something out where that blip is at.
Now, they couldn't physically see an object. Lieutenant Graves said it was like someone was shining a flashlight in that area. But the point is, something was there, which they needed to take seriously because even a small strip of foil sucked into one of the engines could take out an aircraft. But now that they knew that these things weren't radar errors, it made what they were seeing on radar even more peculiar.
We would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but more less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would kind of jump around a bit more. They would not proceed in like a perfectly straight line as you would imagine like a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to kind of be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would kind of be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally. So
winding. And these things were flying around at altitude at speeds comparable to a fighter aircraft. But fighter aircraft don't meander the way these things did. Perhaps strangest of all was the fact that at times, these objects would be completely stationary in 130, 140 mile per hour wind and not wobbling like an aircraft holding a position. I mean, not moving an inch. And they'd do it for hours.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind.
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? Like if you had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now.
Okay.
And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's going to have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfectly still in winds like that.
Because the wind's not perfectly still either, right?
Exactly.
It changes and varies.
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind, it seems. You know, it just seems like it's just there in a way.
All of their bizarre flight characteristics aside, they knew that these weren't drones because they were only over open water working areas, so between 10 and 250 miles off the coast, where there is no land in sight and no vessels these could have been launched from or land on. But now let's fast forward to January 21st, 2015. Lieutenant Graves and his squadron were on a training mission in preparation for a deployment. As part of their training, aircraft would occasionally be sent in to penetrate their airspace, which they were expected to go and intercept. On this day, they're out flying around when suddenly an object appeared on their radar, along with what appeared to be a fleet of other vehicles. Naturally, they thought it was part of their training exercises, so they went to intercept it. But when they got there, it wasn't at all what they were expecting to see.
Dude, there's a drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Can you actually describe what's in the video and what's the reaction in case they haven't seen it?
Yeah, a lot of swearing. But so what you see on the FLIR footage is a black or white, depending on when you look at it, object that's somewhat shaped like a gimbal. And then there seems to be almost like a small funnel of IR energy that's at the top of the bottom of those plates, in a sense. So almost as if, you know, there's a stick going in between two plates, but not that pronounced, right? So there's an energy field that kind of went to a funnel on the top and the bottom. At least that's how it's being portrayed on the FLIR. There's a lot of conversation about that being glare, things of that nature, but it was actually a very tight IR image. It just was nondescript shape, which was interesting. Typically, we would see the skin of the aircraft. We can see the flames coming out of the exhaust, especially at those ranges. But
And there was no flames or there's no exhaust here.
There was no exhaust. There was no, there was no outgassing of propellant in any manner, right? It was just an object that had nothing emitting from it that was stationary in the sky. Well, not stationary, but it was moving along a path, right? It wasn't falling out of the sky.
What you're not seeing, you're seeing the targeting. When you hear him start talking, when you listen to the video, you'll hear the guy go, dude, look, they're all over. Look at the SA page.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh.
So we have a situational awareness page, and when whatever the radar is getting returns on, it'll show up. It's kind of like our God's eye view in the airplane. So what they're actually seeing in this video is when you see the object that he's tracking. When I was talking to one of the other pilots, he said there's actually, when you see the radar video, there's like it almost looks like a formation in front of them, like 5 smaller ones that are moving in front of it, and then they turn. So like a formation, these things turns and starts going the other way. And then while they're filming the gimbal video.
What they essentially saw was, if we were to consider above the object north, so kind of offset to the north of the object, there was a formation of about somewhere between 4 and 6 of these objects in a rough wedge formation, so kind of side by side like this. Mm-hmm. And again, not in a like autopilot type manner where it was very stiff. It was very kind of non-mechanical, the flight mechanics again. And these objects were in that formation and they were going along, and then they turned pretty sharply, but they still had a radius of turn. and then went back in the opposite direction. And during that turn, they were kind of like all over the place. Like it wasn't tight. They weren't even like they weren't flying in a way I would expect them to be flying in relation to a flight lead. They were flying as if they were flying close to each other, but not in formation, which was kind of strange, right? And then when they rolled out, they kind of tightened back up. Like, so when they started that turn and then 180 degrees out, essentially they started flowing in the opposite direction and kind of got back in that formation. And while that was happening, the gimbal object was proceeding, was they left to right. And as those, the formation kind of turned up to the north and was just passing back it, the gimbal just kind of went back in the opposite direction. So to follow it back in that direction.
This was all very strange, but no one really knew what to do about it. They didn't know what these things were or what they even looked like. Yet. One day, 2 of the Red Rippers were flying into the entry point of the training airspace, when suddenly, one of these things went right in between them. The pilots described the object as being a black or dark gray cube inside of a clear sphere, with the corners of the cube appearing to touch the sphere.
What they started seeing originally was these things, and one of them the airplane almost hit one of these things, but it looks like a cube inside of a clear beach ball. So they don't know if it's actually like a surrounding or you don't know if it's a force field. And you see kind of in the gimbal video, it's got like an aura around it. So they're flying out and the airplanes are deployed. We call it combat spread. And one of the airplanes almost hits one of these, goes close down like 50 feet down the side and almost hits one of these floating cubes inside of the beach ball. And someone goes, wow, it's a balloon. It's not a balloon. I mean, these things are literally sitting still. They're no effect from the wind. So if you got 90 knots of wind and they talk about it, these things are just sitting there.
As cool as this sighting sounds, that was not what was predominantly on these guys' minds. They had almost hit one. This was now a major safety issue. Lieutenant Graves and countless other pilots have since reported that these things are always out there, from takeoff to landing, every single day.
So 60 or 70 people had seen it because the radars, the newer radar in the Super Hornets is extremely, extremely capable. Okay.
And actually, we now know from the congressional hearings,
the Navy's officially acknowledged that between 2004 and 2021, 11 near misses occurred involving UAPs that required pilot action and follow-up reports.
But despite being such an egregious safety hazard, nothing was being done about it. Are you understanding Christopher Mellon's frustration and motivation for leaking the videos a bit more?
Echo 6-1 Tango Logic, over. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
What is that one?
That's called the Go Fast. That looks like a Tic Tac. That was another one taken off the East Coast. But they grab it and
bookmark that one.
It's screaming across the ocean at a very high rate of speed. And there's been some debunkers that say, well, it's really not going that fast. It's just the way the airplane is and how the mechanics of the pod are working. When you talk to the crew, because it's actually, I could ask my bud, I'm pretty sure it's the same backseater took both of these videos. Took the Go Fast video and took the gimbal video. And my buddy was on the flight with the gimbal video. But these things, so I called my bud because I'm like, hey, how many people are seeing these things? They're like 60 or 70.
60 or 70.
60 or 70 people had seen these things on radar.
All we can really glean from this clip is that, once again, no discernible means of propulsion. It's not a plane, drone, balloon, camera artifact, system error, etc. What shouldn't be discounted are the reactions of the witnesses.
Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
Who've seen just about everything there is to see out there. And their excitement, to me, indicates that this is something they haven't seen before. We also know from subsequent video releases and congressional hearings and witness testimonies that metallic orbs, which this appears to be, are one of the most commonly reported UAPs by our armed forces.
They call this crystal the Mosul orb. And let's be clear, in the files itself, for all of the balloon people, this stuff has been ruled out. This has been, in terms of the analysis, nobody knows what the hell it is.
So make of that what you will. Christopher Mellon's little stunt worked. The U.S. Navy now has ways to report UAPs, although the other branches of the military need to catch up because it's not just the Navy who's seeing these things. There are now programs and offices tasked with investigating UAPs, as well as congressional hearings about their findings. As whitewashed and underwhelming as they are, we have learned some new things. In one of the hearings, they played some footage from the USS Russell in 2019, showing what appears, from the angle of observation, to be a triangle-shaped UAP that allegedly is acknowledged as being pyramid-shaped in classified briefings. But in the congressional hearings and to the public, they've said at first that it's just some kind of aperture effect that's making it look triangle-shaped, which was debunked. So then they said it was some kind of glitch with the camera, which, who knows? I didn't record the footage, and I'm not a camera expert. But what this footage doesn't tell you is that it was taken during a 3-night event in which 10 Navy warships were swarmed by UAPs. And there's more footage, which we're going to look at, as well as witness testimonies that indicate that these UAP were transmedium. In July of 2019, 10 naval warships were roughly 100 miles off the California coast doing some intensive training exercises with live ordnance. And over the course of 3 consecutive nights, they were swarmed by 100 or more UAPs. Thankfully, some videos of the event are public, including infrared, radar, and deck footage. During these swarm events, they said there was always one high-altitude object at roughly 21,000 feet, and then a bunch of smaller objects, about 10 to 14 feet in diameter, that moved in a sort of ballet around them, which some described as seeming like they were taunting them in a way. First up is IR footage from the USS Omaha. Oliver, roll the clips.
Got to look at the screen. Thermal imaging system. This is the dead of night, 100 miles off the west coast.
Yeah.
And this thing is following the USS Omaha.
John, in your experience, what are we seeing? Like, should we see plumes of heat? What are we seeing? What are we not seeing here?
Yeah, and again, this is kind of one of those videos where unless you know what you're looking at, it's hard to appreciate the significance of what you see it blinking and out there and disappear. On that particular video, what you see is what you get. If the image is representing an oval shape, the heat signature of whatever it was putting out was oval in nature. Okay, what are we not seeing on that clip? We're not seeing
wings.
We're not seeing wings. We're not seeing stabilators. We're not seeing rotors. We're not seeing exhaust. Right? It's a thermal sensing system. So meaning you're going to catch that heat. We're not seeing that in this video. There's none of that there.
Absolutely no visible or discernible means of propulsion or control surfaces. So how is this thing flying? At the end of that video, you hear someone say, "Launch helo."
Brought the possibility to launch helo ASAP.
The Omaha did launch a helicopter to investigate this object, and here's where things start to get a little weird. The guys on the helo reported that they saw, with their eyes, this thing go above their flight altitude to evade them, and then into the water to evade them. These suckers were transmedium. And actually, the IR footage of the UAP shows it appearing to go in the water.
Splashed.
Supporting what the pilots reported seeing, and might also explain why they seem to appear and disappear off of radar.
If you're using a propulsion that's non-reactive, where you're just manipulating the medium that you're in, air, whatever, you can go into the water. So when you hear all the reports of, hey, we've seen these things since World War II that would come out of the water and fly, if you have a technology like this, as long as the object is sealed where you're not going to get water inside of it, there's nothing that says you can't do that.
By the way, they sent out a sub later on to investigate and retrieve any wreckage, but found nothing.
Over a period of hours, crew members on the USS Omaha, which is located in the center of this radar screen, monitored the approach of the unknown objects, as many as 14 at one point, all around the ship. 2 different radar systems watched the objects and estimated their speed.
Track 781 just sped up to 46 knots, 50 knots, closing in. Oh, actually 38 knots.
That one's pretty much perfectly 000 relative, right?
Yeah.
The Omaha sphere appears to have vanished into the ocean.
Whoa, splashed.
At that point, it also vanished from all sensors.
Because again, it's all about corroborative data. Okay, it's not just the witnesses. It's not just the thermal footage of an object going in the water. You've got screen capture of real objects around the ship.
While arguably the least visually impressive, it's significant because it shows that whatever these things are, they're self-luminous. They have lights. So now they're machines, not hot or cold balloons like some might argue from the IR footage.
Could it be a balloon? I mean, it followed that ship for an hour, and there were 14 other ones around it.
I don't see how a balloon could coincidentally follow a ship for the duration of time period that the crews said it did, and in winds. Okay, it's not the dead. It's there's winds out there, off the coast, and typically a balloon will drift in the direction of the wind.
We know these aren't drones because, first of all, you can make out even our most sophisticated military drones on IR.
Even if it is a military-grade drone, you see the machine.
Yes, absolutely.
Secondly, this was 100+ miles out at sea. There was nowhere for a drone to launch from or land on without being tracked. According to witnesses, these things just seemed to appear. And the third reason is because at least 2 of the ships took action, using at least 3 different types of anti-drone tech, all of which were ineffective and were tested shortly afterward and found to be working perfectly. So, no explanation for that. All of this footage is from the USS Omaha, but don't forget, there were at least 9 other warships that this was also happening to. This night vision footage came from another one of the 10 ships called the USS Russell, which appears to show, from angle of observation, one of these objects as being triangle-shaped.
There's this big argument about the shape of it, right?
Sure.
That's what people are saying. It's a lens effect. And actually, they went all the way up to Congress. At first, it was the little NVG, night vision. It was a PVS 14 is the standard issue since 2001 to our armed services. So the guy's got this, and he's filming through it with a camera. So at first they said this one had a triangle aperture, right? And that's what's causing this effect, this distortion, right? And then I was like looking at it because I got one, and I'm like, nah, man, nah. They'd have to like consciously put tape on it. Right. So then they kind of backtracked, moved the goalpost. Now it's the camera that's doing this. And we started asking people involved. The funniest thing someone said to us was, look, if it was pyramid in shape, it would still look like a pyramid even if there was an aperture issue, which I thought was hilarious, right? That's true.
Is it an unknown craft? That's what we wanted to know. And yeah, it is.
Yeah.
What matters is there was something there that wasn't supposed to be, that we don't know what it was.
700 feet, as you've said to me a bunch.
There's a rangefinder. It was 700 feet above the deck.
And there were 3 of them. And so we don't have all the videos from that, but there were 3 of them. Close proximity to one another, 700 feet off of the tail of it, right? And it would follow the ship. And at one point, the ship stopped and the object stopped.
Am I correct?
The Russell was one of the ships that tried the anti-drone tech to no avail. The Paul Hamilton is another one of the 10 ships that were part of this swarm event. 2 witnesses reported that at first they thought this could have been some kind of test, like something sent out there to harass them. But after the first night, it was very apparent that that isn't what was going on. First of all, their higher-ups were coming down saying that they needed to track these things and find out where they were coming from now. It also wouldn't have made any sense for them to be tested like this. Because again, remember, they're out there doing a high-stress, high-level event with live ordnance. There is so much other stuff going on, and safety is paramount. And while doing a test in the middle of the night isn't impossible, it's incredibly unlikely.
So night 1, sure, maybe. Night 2, 3, 4, or whatever it is, they realize, okay, this is real and there's something else going on here. And oh, by the way, again, folks higher in the chain of command are asking for us to stay on this case,
Not only that, but if it was a test, they would have gotten word as to whether or not they passed or failed. And also the Navy and the Pentagon wouldn't have come out saying that they didn't know what this was. According to one witness, there had been both adversarial and non-adversarial drones flying around them the entire deployment. And in fact, this witness in particular had spent 4 months in that specific spot, both before and after this event, and said he never saw anything like this. These things would move and stop with the ship and silently hover so close to the ship that one witness said he could throw a softball from the deck and hit this thing.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Even on the deck of a ship, even you got the wind noise and the waves crashing against the hull and all this and that. You can still hear, from personal experience, I can tell you can still hear the whirring of blades, or like he talked about the hum of a drone. You can still hear that cut through the din of all the other noise. That's one aspect that's important to keep in mind. They didn't hear any of that. Okay.
And they would do this for hours. At this point, these ships were 100+ miles out at sea, way outside the range a conventional drone could traverse.
What else in general just doesn't add up with the conventional drone idea?
Just in general, we were a good amount off of land, and I'm not sure if I can disclose exactly how far away we were, but it was not a range that a conventional drone should ever be able to traverse, especially for the amount of time that we were seeing these. Nothing we know of can stay out here for that long, because the amount of time that we were seeing them was well beyond. I mean, if they flew out there, they would probably need to fly back. So I know that it wasn't a civilian. It absolutely wasn't civilian, because there's nothing available or even that you could modify to do what we saw.
But even more bizarrely was that these objects always approached from the west, from over open water, where the nearest land is Hawaii, over 2,000 nautical miles away.
These things were always coming from the west and then departing into another direction.
Right,
There's nothing out to the west but ocean. Yeah, so even if we're talking off of another ship, let's be really clear. So what's happening is, in this 100-mile radius, swarms simultaneously on 10 ships, and we're giving one example of Paul Hamilton, where these objects are appearing from the west, where there is no land mass, there's no ship that's going to be launching them from the west, and then they're departing after long periods of durational use. They're departing in another direction. So this causes a problem of where's the launch, where's the land.
Let's say you've developed a super duper double secret probation drone that can fly hundreds of miles, and you launch it from, say, San Diego or Catalina, and it's going to buzz these ships. You should be able to track those things. Those ships should be able to track them. Coming there and going back.
That's a great point. So even on the systems that they were tracking them on, they always came from the west. So it's not like it launched from San Diego, did a big circle around, and then came from the west. No, it was always coming from the west originally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's no drone that you know of.
Not that I know of.
That could have that kind of range or fly from Hawaii from the west.
No.
And any vessel they could have potentially been launched from was tracked, which we'll get to that in a minute. Oh, and did I mention they had really ridiculously high-powered spotlights? Witnesses on the Paul Hamilton said that on the third night, one of these objects lit up the entire deck of the ship with a shockingly bright white spotlight for about 2 seconds. The This wasn't like a camera flash. It takes a lot of energy for something to light up an entire deck of a warship like it's the middle of the day.
Now we're talking about a drone that can fly tens of miles out to sea on its own, stay on duration for hours at a time. It's noiseless, okay? It's performing maneuvers that are just, almost unbelievable. And now it's got a spotlight, so it's got even more energy now to be able to produce a spotlight for 2-3 seconds to illuminate an entire Navy warship like that. It just, it's certainly not adding up to what people would think.
This isn't an isolated incident either. This sort of thing has been reported by other naval ships all around the world. In 2022, the New York Post published an article claiming that this UAP swarm event was actually just hundreds of drones launched from a nearby cargo ship called the Bass Strait. The Bass Strait was operating in the vicinity of the Paul Hamilton strike group, so the Paul Hamilton was monitoring them the entire time. At one point, in the midst of this 3-day swarm event, the Paul Hamilton observed what appeared to be 5 to 10 air contacts circling the Bass Strait, which really got the Paul Hamilton guys all fired up, thinking they had finally cracked the case. You gotta understand, at the time, no one was thinking they were being swarmed by UAPs. Whatever these objects were, they belonged to someone, and they came from somewhere. And their higher-ups were on their asses telling them to figure that out now, which they still hadn't been able to do. To make matters worse, they felt like these objects were being very brazen and almost taunting them in a way, like, "Nana nana boo boo, you're not gonna catch us." So when they spotted these objects circling the Bass Strait, they thought, "Aha! Gotcha, you little shits! We're on to you." So the Paul Hamilton reached out to the Bass Strait and asked if these air contacts were theirs, which they denied. Still, the Paul Hamilton watched them like a hawk. They thought for sure these objects are coming from that ship. There was no other possible origin. All they needed was to see even one of these things launch from or land on it, and they could finally have an answer to this rather aggravating series of events. But much to their dismay, the entire time the Paul Hamilton monitored the Bass Strait, they never saw anything launch from or land on that ship, including those 5 to 10 air contacts.
Really wanted to see that because we just wanted an answer because we were tired of it. It was not launching, was not receiving the drones as much as we wanted it to.
Also, further investigation showed that the Bass Strait was actually in port during one of these swarm events, so definitely wasn't coming from them. It's worth mentioning that there have been other swarm events all around the world, which hopefully we'll get to hear more about those in the future. Hi, it's VoiceOver Heather here. Before we move on, I thought I should address real quick what was said about the 2019 UAP swarm event in one of the House committee hearings. Quote, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray vaguely revealed that a second, near-identical incident occurred off a different coast, and that night vision footage and other data from the second incident allowed investigators to become reasonably confident that drones were involved, end quote. Bray said, quote, we're now reasonably confident that these triangles correlate to unmanned aerial systems in the area. The triangular appearance is a result of light passing through the night vision goggles and then being recorded by an SLR camera, end quote. Or, in other words, lights can appear triangle-shaped when viewed through the night vision scope, including lights on drones. Therefore, because night vision footage of drones also appears triangle-shaped, they're reasonably confident that the 2019 UAPs were drones. I'm sorry, what? That's it?
What matters is there was something there that wasn't supposed to be, that we don't know what it was.
First of all, I think they're letting our minds fill in the gaps by declaring these were drones. When they say that, we think conventional drones. Saying that these are drones or unmanned aerial systems does not mean that they are conventional drones.
They're calling it that because that's kind of the baseline you know,
You got to call it
You
something.
got to call it something, right?
So I've spoken to one of the individuals whose job it was to create the designation that we're seeing here today, which is UAS, Unmanned Aerial System. And this individual said to me, that was my only choice, that we need to call them something. And I was told by my command to find what is the current description of of what we're calling an unmanned aerial system. I said, are you significantly happy that that is a good determination for what you saw? Absolutely not.
And what about the plethora of data, footage, and eyewitness accounts all pointing to the fact that these were not conventional drones? If these were in fact conventional drones, then why were 3 different types of our Navy's anti-drone tech completely ineffective against these drones? Also, why didn't they look anything like drones on FLIR? Why couldn't they track these drones? And a major factor here is the fact that they still don't know where they came from or went. Their conclusion assumes that these drones came from the Bass Strait, which we know from the witness testimonies isn't true. It also doesn't explain why the swarm event continued while the Bass Strait was docked in Long Beach. And what about their bizarre flight characteristics, like instantaneous motion and stopping capabilities, and transmedium capabilities, and the fact that they were silent and could light up the entire deck of the ships with a spotlight? Also, in the report, in which they declared that these were drones, they included what is allegedly a FLIR image of one of the objects from this other similar event. And you can clearly make out that it's a quadcopter drone. But we saw the FLIR footage from the Omaha, and these did not look like quadcopter drones. So, I mean, could these have just been conventional drones? Sure. What do I know, really? But am I convinced that these were conventional drones? Not even a little bit. In my opinion, their explanation is basically just, you'll have to take our word for it, and only really works if you don't know the details of the events or have seen any of the other footage. And I don't know about you, but between dozens of eyewitnesses who have nothing to gain by lying about the events, and whose accounts are backed up by footage and data, and was backed up by the Chief of Naval Operations and the Pentagon for years, versus the word of the same kind of government body who's been lying to us for 80 years about this very subject, I don't know. I tend to put a little more stock in the word of people who haven't lied to us for the better part of a century. At the end of the day, all we really know for sure is that these UAPs did not look like or behave like conventional drones, and there are unexplained drones that are occupying our airspace and that demonstrate capabilities far beyond what we or anyone else has. But let me know what you think in the comments. Before we wrap up, I have one honorable mention from 2019 that you've probably seen the pictures from. It's these 3 blurry images that don't appear to show anything. Is that a Batman balloon? This one occurred on the East Coast near the Naval Air Station Oceana. Aviators there reported that while flying out to the W-72 training area, they would regularly encounter these unknown objects just hanging out up there. Objects that would sit there for days at a time at 30,000 feet in 130, 140 mile per hour wind, not moving an inch. Sound familiar? Because these objects presented a legit security and safety hazard, Navy officials finally encouraged aviators to report these sightings. And on March 4th, 2019, during the course of a single flight, so probably an hour and a half, one crew photographed 3 different objects while flying to the training area, which have been called the acorn, the sphere, and the metallic blimp with payload. 3 different objects on a single flight. They were not exaggerating. These things are everywhere up there. There are so many other UAP cases that I would love to cover, but that's the gist of what the Pentagon has released so far. Hopefully you feel a little more informed about the current state of UAP disclosure. Clearly something is going on. Now, whether it's extraterrestrial or interdimensional or just foreign tech? I have no idea. Now, do I believe we'll ever be presented with the really intriguing bits of evidence, let alone the entirety of info we have on UAPs? Hell no. I won't go into all the reasons why I believe that. Corruption and greed. But I want to know what you guys think about the declassified videos and the witness testimonies and whether or not you believe we'll ever be told the whole truth about UAPs. What do you think they are or where they're from? Did you learn anything new? Was there anything I missed? Has your opinion or belief about UAPs changed? Also, feel free to share your own UFO or UAP experiences down in the comments, because I'd love to hear them. And maybe I'll share some of my own in the future. This isn't one of those things we can't talk about without fear of ridicule anymore. These things are real. That's all I've got for you this time. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you again soon. Hang on. Say goodbye, Oliver. I gotta go play with him now.